President Trump is proposing a $1.5 trillion plan to repair and upgrade the nation's infrastructure. $200 billion of that would come from federal funds. The burden for the rest would be up to state and local governments and private investors. President Trump tweeting about it this morning saying, quote, "Our infrastructure plan has been put forward and has received great reviews by everyone except, of course, the Democrats. After many years, we have taken care of our military. Now we have to fix our roads, bridges, tunnels, airports, and more. Bipartisan, make deal Dems." Let's bring in Democratic Congressman John Delaney from Maryland. He has long had a plan for infrastructure, and he's already announced that he's running for president in 2020, which we will discuss in a moment. Welcome, Congressman.
Nice to be here. Thanks.
We have a lot to talk about.
We do.
Okay, so you've been steeped in infrastructure. You put forward a bill about it a year ago. So you've thought a lot about this. What do you think of the president's plan?
Well, look, I think the president's plan is a deregulation bill dressed up as an infrastructure plan.
What does that mean?
Well, that means basically he's talking about putting $200 billion of federal money into projects. But he's actually taking money, and there's a whole variety of estimates. Some people think he's actually taking more money from existing infrastructure programs to put it in his. So think about him creating a few new programs and funding them by defunding other infrastructure programs.
So it's a shell game.
It's a shell game as it relates to the money.
Say.
That's right. It's a shell game as it relates to the money. It won't really result, in my judgment, in an increase in our investment in infrastructure, something we desperately need. And then he does a bunch of deregulation, most likely of environmental regulations, in the bill. So that's kind of the thrust of the bill. And I think he's kind of, the shiny object he's trying to put out there is $200 billion, $1.5 trillion, but that's not really real new net money.
But then why hasn't I mean, since everybody says that they're for infrastructure,
right,
and it does seem to be a bipartisan topic, why hasn't your bill gotten more traction over the past year?
Well, look, at my bill, what I did was something truly bipartisan. We had 40 Democrats, 40 Republicans on a $1 trillion-plus infrastructure program, but it had new money. And the new money that I had proposed was coming from a fix of our international tax system, which was, in fact, fixed in the tax reform bill. But what they did is they fixed the system as a way of creating incentives for money to come back to the United States. That generated revenues. But what they did is they used those revenues in the tax reform plan to lower taxes. What I said we should do is pair that international tax reform with infrastructure, and it was kind of a double bottom line because we end up with more infrastructure and we fix our international
And so why
tax.
hasn't that gotten more traction?
Well, because my Republican colleagues want to just cut taxes. Right. So here's a way of thinking about it. You know how they cut the corporate tax rate to 21?
Yep.
Every 1% of corporate tax rate reduction is about $100 billion. For decades, the business community had argued to lower the corporate tax rate to 25. That's the rate they said would make us competitive. For reasons I can't even begin to explain, they took it way past that goal of the business community, all the way down to 21. Wouldn't this tax reform proposal have been much better if they would have cut the business tax rate from 35 to 25, like the business community asked for years, and put $400 billion new dollars in infrastructure? When you count third-party leverage, you get that $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion.
Listen, it makes perfect sense when you say it here and spell it out on our show, but do you have any Republicans who agree with exactly that, and can you get it passed?
I mean, prior to this tax reform bill, there was a huge bipartisan coalition which I led for infrastructure and tax reform together. Again, in this tax reform plan, which they were entirely focused on cutting taxes, they used a lot of the revenue sources. I called, listen, even a few weeks ago, I called for them to basically go back to that deal, open it up, raise the corporate rate from 21 to 23. That would create $200 billion to fund this plan. Right, putting aside other aspects of this plan, that would be $200 billion of new money, and then you wouldn't have to take money from existing plans, and we'd end up with more net new money in infrastructure, something we desperately need if we want to rebuild our country.
Okay, so listen, you're busy. It's only 993 days away from the 2020 election, and you launched the first campaign ad of the 2020 election for the Super Bowl. Let's play a portion of this for the viewers. This is what
John Delaney said a dirty word in Davenport, then repeated it in Des Moines, and Sioux City, too. In fact, he's been saying it all across the state, unabashedly telling people he's a firm believer in, well,
bipartisanship. Bipartisanship. Bipartisanship.
It might be a dirty word.
So that's clever. So
you're laughing. So
I am laughing.
That's a positive
I think that's a very clever ad that there's a dirty word called bipartisanship.
Yes.
But why are you launching your campaign so early?
Well, look, I think what's going on in the White House is awful. The president's degrading our society, degrading our culture, degrading our standing in the world, and we have to start early. in terms of thinking about what the next chapter is. He's a punctuation of several decades of terrible politics where hyper-partisan politics has divided our countries in ways we could never have imagined. And I think it's time to turn the page on that. Get back to talking about some of the things we agree with each other on, right? Get some things done for the American people. And I think we have to start the conversation now.
And we just did. Congressman
Yes.
John Delaney, thank you very much.